You ever find yourself in the middle of an argument and suddenly think, wait, how did I end up here? One minute you're just trying to make a simple point, and the next you're trapped in a conversation that feels like quicksand. The more you try to explain yourself, the deeper you sink. Carl Jung spent a lot of time studying the patterns behind human behavior. And once you understand those patterns, you start to see why certain arguments feel impossible. It's not about the topic. It's not about the logic. It's about the person in front of you. And there are a few types of people who, no matter how patient or reasonable you are, will pull you into a mental maze you can't escape from. So today, we're breaking down the 3 types of people you should never argue with. Not because you're wrong, and not because you can't hold your own, but because these personalities turn every disagreement into a dead end. And once you see the signs, you'll save yourself hours of frustration and walk away with your sanity intact. First up is the person who always has to be right. And look, this isn't just someone who's confident or someone who likes a good debate. This is the person who treats every single discussion like a battlefield they absolutely must dominate. You could present the clearest point in the world, something so simple it barely needs explaining, and they'll still find a way to flip it, dodge it, or toss it back at you like you misunderstood your own words. Carl Jung often talked about how some people build their entire sense of identity around being the one who knows. For them, being wrong doesn't feel like a small slip. It feels like a crack in who they are. So when you challenge them, even gently, you're not just sharing an opinion. In their mind, you're threatening something they depend on to feel stable. And that's why arguing with them goes nowhere. You're coming into the conversation trying to understand something or clear something up. They're coming in trying to protect a version of themselves that can never be questioned. No matter how calm you stay or how clear your explanation is, they'll keep shifting the goalposts until you eventually realize you're not having a discussion at all. You're just feeding their need to win, and the more you try to make sense of it, the more tangled the conversation becomes. This is the moment where most people get stuck. You start thinking, if I just explain this one part better, they'll get it. But they won't. They can't. Because the conversation was never about the idea. It was about their need to feel unshakably correct. That's why walking away isn't losing. It's simply refusing to play a game that was rigged from the start. Next is the eternal victim, and this one can be even trickier because they don't come off as combative at first. In fact, they often seem gentle, misunderstood, or just overwhelmed by life. But the moment you try to have a real conversation, especially one that involves any kind of disagreement, you suddenly find yourself cast as the bad guy in a story you didn't even know you were part of. Carl Jung talked about how people often build narratives to make sense of their inner world, and the eternal victim leans heavily on a narrative where everything happens to them, never with them. So when you bring up a concern or point out something that needs to be addressed, they don't hear your actual words. They hear an attack. They hear blame. They hear confirmation that the world is stacked against them. And here's the trap. Because they frame themselves as the injured party, you feel pressure to backpedal, soften your point, or over-explain yourself just to avoid hurting their feelings. Before you know it, the disagreement isn't even about the original issue anymore. It's about soothing them, reassuring them, or defending yourself against a version of events that wasn't even close to what you said. This is where arguing becomes impossible. You're trying to clarify something. They're trying to validate a belief that nothing is ever fair to them. Every attempt to straighten out the misunderstanding gets twisted into more evidence that you don't understand them or that you're somehow adding to their problems. The more you try to fix it, the deeper you get pulled into their emotional quicksand. And the part that really drains you is that you start feeling responsible for their reactions. You start thinking maybe you should have phrased it differently or kept quiet altogether, but that's exactly why you should never argue with this type. You're not having a conversation. You're stepping into a storyline where your role is already written, and nothing you say will change it. The smartest move is to stay out of the script entirely. And now we get to the chaos magnet, the person who turns every disagreement into a full-blown storm. This isn't someone who wants clarity or resolution. This is someone who thrives on the tension, the intensity, the back and forth. If the conversation starts to calm down, they'll find a way to spark it right back up, almost like they can't function without some kind of friction in the air. Carl Jung often highlighted how certain personalities lean toward intensity because it keeps them from looking inward. For the chaos magnet, conflict becomes a distraction from their own inner mess. So instead of working through an issue, they stir it, stretch it, twist it, or restart it entirely. And the moment you step in to try and make sense of what's happening, you get pulled into the cycle with them. Here's what makes this type so exhausting. They don't just escalate the situation, they multiply it. You try to clarify one small point, and suddenly you're dealing with 5 more that weren't even part of the original discussion. You try to stay calm, and they crank up the emotional volume. You try to settle things, and they accuse you of avoiding the real issue. It's like every move you make becomes fuel for a new round of arguments, and the more you try to reason with them, the more tangled things get, because they're not arguing to understand. They're arguing to keep the fire alive. It gives them energy. It gives them momentum. It gives them something to push against. Meanwhile, you're left wondering how such a small comment exploded into something that feels completely out of control. That's why engaging with them is a losing battle. You're trying to put the fire out. They're tossing more kindling on it. The best move isn't to argue better or explain harder. It's to stop stepping into the flames altogether. Once you recognize the pattern, you'll realize the safest and smartest choice is to walk away before the whole thing turns into a cycle you can't break. Before you even get pulled into one of these exhausting arguments, knowing the early warning signs can save you a ton of energy. Once you can spot these personalities early, you can decide whether the conversation is worth your time or if it's better to step back entirely. Let's dive deeper. Starting with the always right type. These people almost never just listen. Even if you're calmly explaining something, they're already thinking about how to respond, defend themselves, or turn the conversation in their favor. They rarely admit mistakes, even small ones. Watch for them twisting your words or adding hidden meaning where none exists, or interrupting you to correct minor details that don't actually matter. A key sign is that they rarely ask questions or genuinely try to understand your point. They're more focused on protecting their image. Once you notice this pattern, you realize that trying to convince them is like pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it. You're just wasting your energy. Next, the eternal victim. These people consistently frame themselves as being wronged. Even tiny neutral comments can trigger a strong emotional reaction, because in their mind, every disagreement is proof that the world is against them. Watch for patterns. They might constantly bring up past grievances, feel personally attacked by neutral statements, or need reassurance that they're understood. Conversations with them often drift away from the actual topic and into their personal narrative. They're not interested in resolving issues. They're focused on validating the story that everything is unfair. Once you spot this, you can recognize that arguing with them won't lead to clarity. It will only pull you deeper into their storyline. Finally, the chaos magnet. These people thrive on tension and emotional escalation. At first, they may seem calm or reasonable, but the clue is how they handle quiet or resolution. If a discussion starts to settle and they somehow spark new tension, or if small disagreements turn into drawn-out emotional exchanges, that's a huge red flag. They feed on conflict, And the more you engage, the more you get pulled into their cycle. Even if you try to stay calm, they often keep raising the stakes, introducing new points of contention, or redirecting the conversation to create drama. Recognizing this early is critical because no amount of reasoning will calm them down. They thrive on the intensity itself. A few extra tips to spot these personalities early. Notice how often someone interrupts, how quickly they get defensive, whether they escalate minor issues, and if the conversation ever actually centers on solving a problem, or if it's always about their perspective or emotional energy. Once you pay attention to these patterns, you can protect yourself. The moment you see the signs, you can step back before the argument takes over your mental space. And that, honestly, is the real superpower, saving your time, energy, and peace of mind before you even get dragged in. Now let's talk about what actually happens if you don't walk away from these arguments. And trust me, it's exactly why you need to recognize these personalities early. First, the always right type. If you keep engaging, you'll notice yourself repeating the same points over and over, getting more frustrated each time, while they barely budge. You start over-explaining, overthinking, trying to phrase things perfectly so they'll get it. And still, nothing lands. The more you push, the more defensive they become, and the more drained you feel. By the end, you're emotionally spent, mentally exhausted, and your original point, completely lost in the shuffle. With the eternal victim, it's even more exhausting. You might start with a simple clarification or a gentle disagreement, and suddenly you're cast as the antagonist in their ongoing narrative. Every word you say gets reframed as proof that you don't understand them, or worse, that you're contributing to the problem. You try to explain, but nothing works, because the conversation isn't about understanding. It's about feeding their sense of being wronged. If you stay, you start feeling guilty for their emotions, even when you haven't done anything wrong. And that guilt? It lingers long after the conversation ends. Then there's the chaos magnet. If you don't step away, they'll pull you into a whirlwind of tension that just keeps spinning. You try to settle things, but they escalate. You try to clarify, but they twist. Every attempt to make sense of the situation just keeps the cycle going. The more you push, the more it intensifies. And suddenly, a small disagreement turns into a full-blown emotional storm. You feel like you're trapped in a loop that you can't escape. And your energy, focus, and patience get drained faster than you even realize. The common thread here? None of these arguments are about solving anything. They're about defending ego, validating a narrative, or feeding conflict. If you stay, you don't just waste time. You lose energy, focus, and often a sense of calm that you can't easily get back. That's why recognizing the signs early and walking away isn't cowardice. It's smart. It's protecting your mental space, your emotional energy, and ultimately your peace of mind. Because once you step out of the cycle, you regain control. And that's where real power lies. All right, now let's get to the part that actually helps you. How to protect your energy in real time when you realize you're dealing with one of these personalities. Because knowing the signs is one thing, but knowing what to do in the moment is what saves your sanity. First, set a mental boundary. The moment you notice someone shifting into always right, eternal victim, or chaos magnet mode, remind yourself you don't have to engage fully. Take a breath, slow down, and give yourself permission to respond calmly, or not at all. You don't owe them your energy just because they're pushing it out there. Second, control the pace of the conversation. Don't get pulled into their momentum. If they're escalating, pause, ask for clarification, or take a break. Even a simple, "Let me think about that for a minute," or "I'll come back to this later," can diffuse the tension and give you space to stay grounded. Third, practice selective engagement. Focus only on points that actually matter and let the rest slide. With the always right type, don't get caught in trying to win every minor detail. With the eternal victim, don't try to argue against their whole narrative. Just acknowledge, stay neutral, and don't feed the drama. With the chaos magnet, don't chase every escalation. Keep calm, stick to facts, and disengage from emotional spirals. Fourth, have an exit plan ready. Sometimes the smartest move is literally walking away, even if politely. You can excuse yourself without guilt. I think we're going in circles. Let's revisit this later. Or, I need to step back from this conversation for now. Protecting your energy doesn't mean you're avoiding responsibility. It means you're choosing to engage in ways that are productive, not draining. Finally, check in with yourself afterward. Reflect on how the conversation made you feel, and reinforce your boundaries for the future. Each time you practice protecting your energy in real time, it becomes easier to spot the signs earlier, stay calm under pressure, and walk away without regret. In short, protecting your energy is about staying aware, controlling your reactions, and refusing to get pulled into someone else's cycle. It's not about winning, it's about staying sane. And trust me, once you master this, arguments that used to drain you will barely touch you at all. Before we wrap everything up, it's worth asking, why do we even get pulled into these arguments in the first place? Why do we keep engaging, even when it's clearly draining and going nowhere? Understanding this helps you avoid falling into the trap again. First, it's human nature to want to be understood. When someone challenges us, or seems wrong, unfair, or difficult, we instinctively want to clarify, defend ourselves, or set things straight. That's perfectly normal. But with these personalities, that instinct actually works against us. The always right type, the eternal victim, and the chaos magnet aren't engaging in a discussion to understand you. They're focused on their own patterns. So when we try to explain ourselves, we're often just giving them more fuel. Second, ego gets involved. We don't like feeling wrong, dismissed, or overpowered in a conversation. Even if we know logically that the argument is pointless, we feel compelled to push back, to win, or at least to be seen as reasonable. That desire to defend ourselves keeps us locked in cycles that don't lead anywhere. Third, there's the instinct to fix things. We see someone upset, defensive, or escalating, and we feel responsible for helping them calm down or see reason. But with these personalities, that instinct is a trap. They often resist solutions, focus on narratives that don't change, or escalate conflict for their own reasons. So trying to fix the argument ends up draining you instead. Finally, emotions play a huge role. Anger, frustration, or even impatience can make us react before we think. The longer an argument drags on, the more our emotions escalate, making it harder to disengage and giving the other person exactly what they want. An ongoing cycle of conflict. So the reason we argue isn't always about the topic itself. It's about instinct, ego, empathy, and emotions. Once you understand that, you realize you don't need to engage on their terms. You can step back, protect your energy, and choose whether the conversation is actually worth it. Recognizing this is the first step to breaking the cycle and staying sane in discussions that used to leave you frustrated and exhausted. Let's talk about how to respond without escalating the situation. This is where most people get tripped up. They see the signs, they notice the personality patterns, but they don't know how to react in a way that keeps their energy intact. The good news? It's possible, and it's simpler than you think. First, focus on neutral language. Avoid words that sound like blame, judgment, or criticism. Instead of saying, "You're wrong about this," try something like, "I see it differently," or "Here's another perspective." Small changes in phrasing can make a huge difference because you're not giving the other person a reason to get defensive or escalate. Second, use reflective listening. That doesn't mean agreeing. It means showing you're hearing them without fueling the fire. Phrases like, "I hear what you're saying," or "I understand this is important to you." Acknowledge their perspective without giving it power over your emotions. It helps slow down the momentum of the argument. Third, control your own tone and pacing. Speak calmly, slowly, and evenly. When someone is escalating, raising your voice or matching their energy only makes things worse. By staying calm, you naturally lower the intensity of the conversation and keep yourself in control. Fourth, set gentle boundaries in real time. You can say things like, "Let's pause this and come back later," or "I need a moment to think about that." You're not rejecting them, you're protecting your mental space. It's a way to disengage respectfully without getting pulled deeper into the cycle. Finally, pick your battles. Not every point is worth arguing. Decide ahead of time what truly matters and let the rest slide. With the always right type, don't fight minor details. With the eternal victim, don't challenge their narrative unnecessarily. With the chaos magnet, don't chase every flare-up. The key is staying aware, using calm, neutral responses, and refusing to feed the argument's energy. When you respond this way, you maintain control, protect your energy, and prevent the conversation from spiraling into exhaustion. And the best part? You're not avoiding responsibility. You're choosing to engage in a way that actually works for you. So let's wrap this up. We've gone through the 3 types of people you should never argue with: the always right, the eternal victim, and the chaos magnet. We've talked about why we get pulled into arguments in the first place, how to spot the signs early, what happens when you stay, and most importantly, how to protect your energy in real time. Here's the bottom line. You can't control how other people behave, but you can control how you respond. Recognizing these patterns isn't about labeling someone or avoiding responsibility. It's about protecting your peace, your energy, and your mental space. The moment you step out of a cycle that's designed to trap you, you reclaim control. Remember, walking away isn't losing. Staying calm and setting boundaries isn't weakness. In fact, it's smarter, stronger, and far more effective than trying to win an argument that was never meant to be won.